Tonight we drift backward through time, beyond the hum of modern cities and electric lights, to a wide, sun-washed plain where reeds whisper along the banks of the Euphrates. It is here, amid shifting floodplains and watchful stars, that Babylon begins, not with grandeur, but with grit. There are no walls yet, no kings, no myths, only clusters of clay dwellings, stone tools, and the restless murmur of people trying to outsmart nature. The air is thick with mosquitoes and uncertainty, but also promise. Somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd millennium BCE, a small settlement takes shape on a patch of land kissed by the river's curve. The soil, once enemy to bare feet, proves fertile enough to coax grain from the ground. Canals are dug, clumsily at first, then with growing precision. Over seasons and generations, the settlement morphs into something more deliberate. Farmers arrive, then traders, then the priestly class, dragging with them tales of gods and the need to build temples tall enough to reach the divine. Mud brick by mud brick, Babylon rises, not as the capital of an empire, not yet, but as a place people whisper about in nearby towns. The Sumerians, older and better established to the south, raise an eyebrow. The Akkadians to the north eye its grain stores. Yet Babylon persists. Its location is enviable. Near trade routes, along a river that floods just predictably enough to sustain crops without wiping out entire seasons. And the name, Babylon, or Babalu, Gate of the Gods, carries just enough grandeur to make people look twice. Though some historians still argue whether that name was applied early or retroactively during its golden age, there's little doubt the early inhabitants already sensed they lived in a place of strange potential. Temples sprout up like stone mushrooms, modest at first, then more ambitious. The gods here have long, complicated names and endless needs. Offerings, hymns, regular maintenance of their increasingly elaborate sanctuaries. Chief among them is Marduk, a deity whose star only begins to rise centuries later. For now, the spiritual landscape is crowded. Each family honors a small constellation of protective spirits. The early Babylonians do not call themselves Babylonians, in the way that later poets and conquerors will. They are simply people of this place, living between wet seasons and dry, trying to bargain with gods and neighbors alike. Still, archaeological layers tell a story of increasing organization. A rudimentary form of writing, cuneiform, starts to appear on clay tablets. These early scribes record rations, labor rosters, maybe even the occasional complaint. And then, as always, come the walls. Defensive architecture signals a shift in the city's consciousness. Walls say, "We are worth protecting." They also say, "Someone is trying to take what we have." The bricks are sun-dried, light brown, etched sometimes with the symbols of local rulers. In time, those rulers grow bold enough to claim more than their immediate surroundings. Small skirmishes with neighboring towns evolve into planned campaigns. Babylon is no longer just a settlement. It is becoming a player. But the river does not always cooperate. Some years, it floods too much, drowning crops. Other times, it sulks and dries to a trickle. Entire seasons can hinge on the angle of the sun and the stubborn behavior of upstream tributaries. One unusually bad flood once carried off half the city's grain reserves and, perhaps more alarmingly, 3 sacred goats. Through hardship, however, the city begins to craft an identity. The people learn not only to build and irrigate, but to record, calculate, and speculate. They watch the stars at night, not for romance, but for hints of what the gods might be planning. If Venus appears just so, perhaps a good harvest is coming. If Mars lingers, maybe war looms. A few broken tablets from these early years suggest the existence of traveling merchants. One curious entry mentions a man from a far city who traded lapis lazuli in exchange for a large bird and some date wine. Whether the wine was any good is lost to time, but the implication is clear: Babylon is already reaching outward. The city's earliest rulers are little more than names scratched into king lists. Many have titles like Ensi or Lugal, and their reigns are often suspiciously tidy. 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 150 years, though that last number is probably a clerical error or a mythic flourish. Historians still argue whether these early rulers truly existed or were later inventions meant to lend legitimacy to newer dynasties. And yet, as night deepens and the moon settles above the plain, Babylon quietly thrives. Livestock bleats softly in pens. Scribal apprentices mutter multiplication tables. Somewhere, a mother sings to a baby wrapped in woven reeds. The city breathes in the dark, unaware of the empires it will one day birth and bury. In the shadows beyond the outer fields, jackals pace. They sniff the edges of human life but keep their distance. For now, the scent of smoke and spice and freshly cut reeds holds them back. Babylon is small still, but it is dreaming, and that dream has teeth. The dream expands, slow but deliberate. Babylon grows not with the sudden explosion of conquest, but with the quiet force of trade, agriculture, and belief. As the sun rises over its river-split horizon, the streets come alive with chatter and clamor. Mud-brick homes line narrow alleys, their flat rooftops catching the morning light. Smoke curls upward from open hearths, and children chase each other past sleepy donkeys tethered outside shops. By the turn of the second millennium BCE, Babylon has begun to take itself quite seriously. The ziggurat, an architectural middle finger to both gravity and the gods, climbs higher, tier by tier. Dedicated to Marduk, who has now firmly elbowed his way to the top of the local pantheon, the structure is part temple, part staircase to heaven, and entirely exhausting to climb. At its peak, priests observe the skies, perform rituals, and, one suspects, enjoy the best view in the city. Trade flourishes along dusty roads and winding canals. Boats glide along the Euphrates, heavy with grain, wool, fish, and finely carved cylinder seals. Merchants haggle over copper ingots and dried figures. The market is a sensory onslaught, the bleating of livestock, the scent of cumin and crushed dates, and the sharp cries of fishmongers extolling the virtues of their half-dead catch. Babylon becomes a city that does not just consume wealth, it creates it. Artisan workshops churn out textiles, jewelry, pottery, and tools. Clay tablets record transactions with a flair for detail that suggests some scribes had too much time and not enough excitement. One amusing account details a dispute over a shipment of defective sheep, described as unworthy of sacrifice or stew. Babylonian bureaucracy, not for the faint of heart. But wealth, like honey, draws flies. Rivals begin to circle, some jealously, others strategically. The city's power has begun to attract attention beyond Mesopotamia. Kingdoms rise and fall across the region, and alliances shift like river channels after a storm. The Amorites, a semi-nomadic people with a fondness for city-states and a knack for leadership, move in gradually. Not as conquerors, at first, but as settlers and political climbers. By the 19th century BCE, an Amorite king has taken the Babylonian throne. It's under these new rulers that Babylon begins to centralize its influence. Roads improve. Defensive walls thicken. The priesthood aligns itself with the royal court, though not without the occasional divine tantrum. One temple official famously claimed Marduk turned his back on the city for an entire lunar cycle after the king insulted the temple cook. Whether the god's anger or the cook's food was more offensive remains unclear. Still, stability is fragile. Rival city-states, Isin, Larsa, Ishnuna, all jockey for power. War is never far. Soldiers march out beneath the blazing sun, armor clinking and sandals slapping the baked earth. Some battles are epic, others more like glorified raids. Territories change hands, and treaties are signed with elaborate oaths sworn under the gaze of gods who, if tablet records are to be believed, have seen it all before. And yet, within the city walls, life is still largely ordinary. Children learn their letters by copying out the same phrases over and over on clay tablets. The farmer grows barley becomes as familiar as the quick brown fox. Scribes in training wince as teachers rap their knuckles with styluses for sloppy lines. In the courtyards, old women grind grain while gossiping about their neighbors' dubious sacrifices. One fragmentary tablet from this period hints at an unexpected pastime: competitive liver divination. Priests would examine sheep livers to predict the future, drawing conclusions based on texture, color, and lobe shape. Some scholars even believe there was a standard model liver kept in the temple as a reference guide, a kind of anatomical cheat sheet for the spiritually curious. Still, beneath the city's confidence lurks anxiety. The river, though vital, remains capricious. Its waters nourish the fields one year, and flood the temples the next. Disease occasionally sweeps through the population, its causes unknown, its cures uncertain. Foreign armies remain a constant threat on the horizon, and internal dissent is a shadow that never quite fades. Babylon is no longer just a city, it is a symbol. A hub of administration, religion, and economic power, yes, but also a beacon of ambition. Foreign envoys arrive, bearing tribute or veiled threats. Maps begin to mark Babylon with increasing prominence, its name inked larger with every passing decade. Historians still argue whether this period should be called the First Babylonian Empire, or whether such terminology exaggerates what was essentially a particularly influential city-state with good PR. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Babylon is not yet the center of the world, but it is quickly becoming impossible to ignore. And so the city pulses forward, absorbing newcomers, refining its identity, and inching ever closer to greatness. Behind its thickening walls, life unfolds in 1,000 tiny dramas, none of them remarkable on their own, yet together forming the early heartbeat of one of the ancient world's most enduring legends. In the growing twilight, temple lamps flicker to life. The priests whisper evening chants, the market winds down, and the river, ever watchful, reflects the stars like a dark mirror. Babylon sleeps uneasily, its dreams full of both conquest and calculation. The city's rhythm deepens as it slips into the 18th century BCE, and with it comes a man whose name will outlast empires, Hammurabi. His rise is not dramatic at first, one more king in a long line of rulers whose names crumble on clay tablets, but his impact will ripple through millennia. Under his reign, Babylon stops expanding cautiously and starts behaving like a capital. Walls stretch farther, bureaucrats multiply, and scribes wear out their styluses keeping up. Hammurabi rules with a mix of military cunning, diplomatic savvy, and a near-religious obsession with law and order. His campaigns are calculated, toppling rival kings with the efficiency of a seasoned chess master. Isin, Larsa, Marie, they all fall, not in chaotic conquest, but as pieces in a carefully orchestrated regional puzzle. By the time he's done, Babylon isn't just a strong city, it is the center of a unified southern Mesopotamian kingdom. And then comes the stele, a black basalt monument, towering over most men and etched with 282 laws. It is Hammurabi's most enduring legacy. The Code of Hammurabi is less a legal innovation and more a public relations coup. It starts with the king proclaiming how the gods chose him to bring justice to the land, then descends into a tightly packed catalogue of dos, don'ts, and very specific consequences. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. Direct, unambiguous, and probably effective, assuming the builder could read cuneiform. The code covers contracts, marriage, theft, inheritance, irrigation rights, even tavern brawls. It's simultaneously harsh and progressive. Some clauses suggest women had the right to own property and initiate divorce. Others, like the infamous eye for an eye punishments, lean toward the dramatic. Historians still debate how often these laws were enforced, or whether the stele was more symbolic than judicial. Perhaps it stood in the temple courtyard more as a monument to royal authority than a tool of daily justice. In any case, the image of Hammurabi presenting his code to the god Shamash, the sun deity of justice, is a visual declaration. Divine law flows through the king. Not beside him. Through him. Beyond the stele, his reign sees a flowering of infrastructure and intellectual life. Canals are dug and maintained with military precision. Fields yield more grain than ever. The temples hum with activity, rituals, processions, and endless accounting. Babylon becomes a city of numbers and offerings, of priestly calendars and astronomical sightings. Cuneiform scribes record planetary movements and phases of the moon, all under the watchful gaze of the gods. Inside the ziggurats, chants rise with the smoke of sacrifices. Offerings of beer, bread, and fattened animals are laid before sacred statues. The priests perform their duties with grave intensity. It is a world where divine favor must be earned daily, and any slip could bring ruin. Among the people, life goes on in rhythm with the seasons. Farmers sow and reap, craftspeople mold and carve, merchants haggle and travel. Children are taught not only how to write, but how to read omens from liver spots and bird patterns. The city is not just a place of commerce, it is a great circuit board of cosmic order. And yet, as steady as Hammurabi's rule seems, the future already begins to fray at the edges. His successors inherit a larger kingdom than they can manage. Borders stretch thin. Vassals grow restless. Babylon's reach exceeds its grasp. One curious anecdote survives from this time, a dispute between two scribes over the placement of a comma-like mark in a legal tablet. The tablet in question had to do with a shipment of barley and whether or not it was cursed. A tiny wedge made the difference between profit and calamity. Apparently, the matter escalated to a temple court. Babylonian bureaucracy strikes again. Hammurabi dies, and though his name echoes through time, his empire does not long outlive him. The cracks widen quickly. Cities that once bowed begin to defy. A dynasty that rose through clever alliances and just laws falters under its own weight. Like a ziggurat built too tall, the structure begins to lean. Historians still argue whether the collapse was due to economic strain, external invasion, internal rebellion, or a combination of all three. What is certain is that by the 16th century BCE, Babylon's influence has contracted. Its buildings stand, its gods remain revered, but its voice is quieter in the affairs of the wider world. Still, the idea of Babylon endures. The stele, the laws, the myth of Hammurabi's divine mandate, all these will be copied, studied, even plagiarized in distant lands and later centuries. Babylon is becoming more than a city. It is becoming a symbol. And symbols are harder to conquer than walls. The sun dips behind the rooftops once more. Somewhere in a quiet courtyard, a clay tablet is pressed with a ruling about stolen goats. The streets still echo with footsteps. The river still glides past the docks. Babylon has weathered its first real cycle of rise and retreat. But it will not be the last. Time creeps forward, dragging Babylon along with it. The mighty walls still cast long shadows at dusk, the temples still hum with incense and incantation, but the city is no longer the unquestioned center of the known world. After Hammurabi's death, his successors, less brilliant, more brittle, fail to maintain the grip he once held on the region. The first Babylonian dynasty slips into decline, not with a cataclysm, but with a slow unraveling, like a robe gradually unstitched by time and politics. The Kassites arrive, not as a conquering horde but as a steady presence. Originating from the Zagros Mountains to the northeast, these horse-loving outsiders don't storm the gates. They insinuate themselves into the crumbling framework of Babylonian rule. Over decades, they transition from threat to tenant, then from tenant to ruler. By the mid-16th century BCE, they've quietly taken over, ushering in what some historians call the Kassite dynasty, though others argue about whether they ever fully Babylonianized or simply occupied the throne with cultural distance intact. Regardless of their foreign origin, the Kassites are remarkably good tenants. Instead of burning Babylon to the ground, they restore its temples, respect its gods, and keep the city running. It's a little like inheriting an antique mansion. You don't have to like the wallpaper to know the plumbing's worth preserving. The Kassites even adopt Marduk as the supreme deity, honoring him with rituals and offerings that, frankly, some Babylonian rulers never bothered with. Under Kassite rule, Babylon experiences one of its longest periods of political stability, an ironic twist, given how historians used to write them off as boring. Their kings reign for decades, trade routes hum with activity, and the city becomes a diplomatic hub in a regional network of Bronze Age superpowers. Letters written in Akkadian, a sort of diplomatic Esperanto, fly between Babylon, Egypt, Hatti, Assyria, and Elam. The Amarna letters, found in Egypt, contain Babylonian correspondence that ranges from marriage negotiations to polite accusations of gold fraud. Globalization, ancient edition. Meanwhile, Babylonian astronomers refine their observations. Priests chart the positions of Venus and Jupiter with alarming accuracy for people who thought eclipses were signs of divine disapproval. In one tablet, a particularly dramatic priest warns that a red moon over the city means a plague is coming unless someone sacrifices 3 white goats, a roasted duck, and possibly a cucumber. Scholars still debate whether the cucumber was metaphorical or just a last-minute addition by a hungry scribe. The city thrives, but not without its quirks. One curious artifact from the Kassite period is a kaduru, stone boundary markers that recorded land grants from the king. These weren't just legal documents. They were magical objects covered in cuneiform, divine symbols, and terrifying curses. Whoever moves this stone, may the gods tear out his foundations like weeds, one declares. Babylonian property law was not subtle. Yet for all its order, this era is not free from disruption. External pressures begin to mount. Neighboring powers like the Elamites and the Hittites periodically test Babylon's defenses. The Hittites, under King Mursili I, even sack Babylon in the 16th century BCE, though they don't stick around. It's a hit-and-run raid, more of a symbolic blow than a strategic takeover. Babylon survives, though bruised. The Kassites return. The temple fires are rekindled. Internally, the vast bureaucracy starts to show signs of strain. Records multiply. Officials quibble over grain allotments and canal maintenance. One surviving complaint tablet accuses a junior scribe of stealing temple rations to feed his pet monkey. Proof, if nothing else, that even in ancient Babylon, nepotism and office drama were very much alive. As the centuries pass, the Kassites grow increasingly indistinct from the culture they once adopted. Their names remain foreign, but their rituals, their inscriptions, and their governance all speak Babylonian. Even their royal seals bear the image of Marduk atop his dragon. It's assimilation through osmosis, one dusty tablet at a time. Still, by the 12th century BCE, the long peace begins to fray. The great powers of the Bronze Age collapse in waves. Hatti burns. Egypt staggers. The sea peoples appear, wreaking havoc along Mediterranean shores. Babylon feels the tremors. Elamites from the east grow bold, launching invasions that eventually succeed in sacking the city. In one devastating episode, the Elamites loot the sacred statue of Marduk himself, dragging the divine effigy back to Elam like a cosmic trophy. The psychological damage is profound. For Babylon, this isn't just theft, it's spiritual hostage-taking. Without Marduk in his temple, the city feels hollow, as if its divine lifeline has been severed. Priests scramble to reinterpret omens, kings vow revenge, and scribes quietly lament the bad luck in their diaries. Historians still argue whether this period constitutes a true collapse or a messy transformation. What's clear is that Babylon, while battered, does not vanish. The Kassite dynasty ends, and new rulers rise. Dynasties flicker like candle flames in the wind, short-lived, sometimes overlapping, often chaotic. And through it all, the city endures. Its walls, rebuilt and repainted. Its gods, renamed and reinstalled. Its people, resilient as ever. They continue to farm, to trade, to argue about port taxes and sacrificial procedures. Babylon persists, not always as a capital, but always as an idea. Night settles gently across the ruined ziggurat. The scent of tamarisk and smoke lingers in the warm breeze. A tablet is etched in a quiet corner of the temple. The stars blink overhead, silent witnesses to Babylon's stubborn refusal to disappear. With the centuries turning and the dust of old dynasties settling, Babylon once again reclaims its rhythm. The chaos of invasions and regime changes begins to fade into something quieter, though never fully calm. It is the first millennium BCE now, and though the city has been bruised by Elamites and humbled by lost gods, it begins to shimmer again, this time as a hub not only of power, but of learning, ritual, and celestial wonder. In priestly quarters lit by flickering oil lamps, a new Babylonian obsession takes root: the sky. No longer content with reading divine intent from sheep entrails alone, the scholars of this era begin mapping the heavens with astonishing precision. They track the movement of stars, the wanderings of planets, and the gentle wobbles of the moon. A priest astronomer, known only from a few tablets, predicts a lunar eclipse with chilling accuracy, though, admittedly, he also predicts the fall of a nearby king who lives another 20 years. No system is perfect. Babylonian mathematics thrives alongside this burgeoning astronomy. The base 60 system, elegant and maddening in equal measure, allows complex calculations of time, distance, and celestial cycles. Some tablets even include tables of squares and cubes, complete with dusty corrections. Historians still argue whether these early mathematical feats were the result of genuine theoretical interest or just an extremely nerdy form of temple bookkeeping. Magic and science blur together here. There's no stark divide between priest and scholar. The same man who calculates the phase of Venus might also be tasked with preparing protective amulets or reciting spells against toothache demons. Babylon's world is one where knowledge serves not just understanding, but control over fate, illness, even the whims of angry gods. And the libraries grow. Across temple complexes and palace corridors, clay tablet collections multiply. Each tablet is a snapshot of a thought, a prayer, a number, a myth. They are filed carefully on shelves, each bearing tiny cuneiform inscriptions that serve as titles or categories. One tablet from this period records a massive flood and offers a curious note in the margin, copied from older tablet, found damaged. Ancient footnotes. Babylon was already citing its sources. But not all texts are practical or divine. Epic poetry circulates too, grand tales of gods and heroes, of monsters and moral puzzles. Stories like Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, become part of the cultural bloodstream. In that tale, the god Marduk slays the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat and fashions the world from her body. It's not exactly bedtime reading, but it's effective propaganda. Babylon's chief god didn't just manage the cosmos, he built it from the corpse of a threat. Meanwhile, in ordinary homes, people live out lives both mundane and mystical. Farmers tally barley yields. Midwives chant invocations over birthing beds. Merchants carry lapis lazuli and cedar through the market, muttering about unfair exchange rates. Babylonian society is layered and regulated, but full of human quirks. One legal document from this time involves a man attempting to sue his neighbor over a goat that allegedly stared at him threateningly. The outcome is unclear, but the tablet was signed by 3 witnesses and a priest, which seems excessive unless the goat really was unsettling. The temples, naturally, remain the beating heart of the city. Ziggurats still rise in angular tiers, their steps washed and swept, their altars laden with offerings. Rituals are carefully choreographed. A temple might employ hundreds: priests, acolytes, bakers, brewers, singers, and scribes. One unlucky official was once reprimanded in writing for forgetting to provide clean linens for the statue of Marduk, an oversight treated with the seriousness of treason. The gods, after all, deserved the very best. Babylon's influence during this time spreads quietly but deeply. Though the city is not always the dominant political power, its culture, its language, calendar, rituals, and scientific knowledge travels far beyond its walls. Assyrians to the north adopt Babylonian astronomical techniques. Scholars from other lands send emissaries to learn or copy tablets. The city becomes a kind of intellectual lighthouse, casting a glow that stretches across empires. And yet, for all its lofty achievements, the Babylonian worldview remains soaked in anxiety. The future is always a threat. Every eclipse could signal doom. Every illness might be a curse. Elaborate rituals are designed to ward off bad omens, sometimes with success, sometimes not. A common rite involves transferring the sins of a person into a clay figurine, which is then ceremoniously smashed or buried. It's spiritual pest control, Babylon style. A lesser-known curiosity emerges around this time, a spell designed to ward off bathroom demons. The text warns of invisible creatures that lurk in latrines, waiting to afflict the vulnerable. The recommended protection? A particular sequence of chants and, oddly enough, drawing a circle with flour around the toilet area. Scholars still debate whether this was literal or symbolic, but the impulse is timeless. Even in one of the world's most advanced cities, people worry about bad things happening in the bathroom. Despite these fears, Babylon's self-image hardens into pride. Its scribes begin to refer to the city not just by name, but by title, Babylon the Great. Its rulers boast of divine favor, of city walls that shine like the stars, of gates that could defy entire armies. Whether or not these claims are inflated doesn't matter. The belief alone gives the city weight. At night, the sky above Babylon glows faintly red from the fires of thousands of hearths and torches. On the rooftops, astronomer priests raise their eyes to the planets and mark down their paths in careful columns. Below, lovers whisper in courtyards. Bakers roll out dough. A dog barks once, then is quiet. The world turns, and Babylon records its movement, tablet by tablet, prayer by prayer. It is a city that sees more than it understands, and writes down more than it explains. But in doing so, it keeps its story alive. The quiet murmur of Babylon's golden centuries eventually gives way to the sound of boots. Heavy ones. Marching in cadence. The Assyrians have arrived. They come not with curiosity, but with iron. Their kings are not subtle men, and their ambitions are carved, literally, into palace walls. Ashurnasirpal, Shalmaneser, Tiglath-Pileser, Sennacherib, their names crash down like war drums. From the north, the Assyrian Empire rolls over Mesopotamia like a tide, and Babylon, regal and radiant, stands directly in its path. At first, Babylon resists. Then it capitulates. Then it resists again. The relationship between Babylon and Assyria is a long and exhausting one, like two proud siblings locked in an endless tug-of-war over who gets the throne, the gods, and the good curtains. One moment, Babylon is granted nominal independence under an Assyrian-friendly king. The next, it's being sieged again because that king got ideas above his station. The Assyrians, for all their military genius, are never quite sure what to do with Babylon. They want to control it, but they also know it's sacred ground. Even the most brutal Assyrian kings hesitate to desecrate Marduk's temple outright, though hesitation is not the same as mercy. In one infamous case, Sennacherib, angered by yet another Babylonian rebellion, decides enough is enough. In 689 BCE, he razes the city. Not metaphorically. He literally floods it, tears down its walls, and drags away its statues. He boasts that he turned the city into a swamp, that its place and its temple I destroyed. It is one of the most traumatic episodes in Babylon's history, and ironically, it backfires. Even in Nineveh, Assyria's glittering capital, people start whispering that Sennacherib went too far. Destroying Babylon is one thing, insulting its gods is another. His own son, Esarhaddon, takes the throne and immediately orders Babylon rebuilt, stone by stone, altar by altar, with enough ceremonial repentance to make even the most irritable deity nod in grudging approval. Historians still argue whether this act of contrition was political savvy, genuine piety, or just guilt. What's certain is that Babylon once again rises from its ruins, scarred, but not broken. The priests return. The temples reopen. The ziggurats base is cleared of debris and rituals resume, if a bit warily. And so the cycle continues. Babylon rebels. Assyria punishes. Babylon is forgiven. Babylon rebels again. At one point, the Assyrians try a new approach, appointing Assyrian princes as governors under Babylonian titles. It goes about as well as you'd expect. The locals smile politely and then immediately start plotting. Amidst this dance of rebellion and reconstruction, daily life carries on. Farmers still coax grain from stubborn soil. Children still learn cuneiform by copying increasingly obscure legal phrases. One surviving exercise tablet from this period includes the phrase, "The ox of the enemy is unclean and shall not enter my field," which suggests either an agricultural boundary dispute or a truly niche insult. Despite the tension, cultural exchange flourishes. Assyrian and Babylonian scribes correspond. Babylonian astronomers influence their northern counterparts. Even military engineers trade ideas, although usually at sword point. The Assyrians adopt elements of Babylonian religion, including reverence for Marduk, though they still insist their own god, Ashur, is the true top deity. Diplomatic conversations between temples likely included a lot of smiling and grinding of teeth. And then, suddenly, the balance shifts. Assyria, stretched too far and fighting too many wars on too many fronts, begins to crack. Around the late 7th century BCE, Babylon senses the change. A Chaldean prince named Nabopolassar arises, not as a client ruler, but as a contender. Backed by a coalition of southern tribes and later by the Medes from the Iranian plateau, he makes a bold move. He challenges Assyria outright. In 626 BCE, he declares Babylonian independence. This time, Babylon doesn't just rebel, it retaliates. Nabopolassar and his allies march north. They attack Assyrian strongholds. They push past the Tigris. They lay siege to Nineveh itself. And in 612 BCE, Nineveh falls. The great Assyrian capital, once feared across the world, is reduced to rubble and fire. It is a moment of poetic justice. Babylon, so often the subject of conquest, now becomes the agent. The city that was flooded and flattened has helped destroy the very empire that did it. Nabopolassar doesn't live to enjoy the full fruits of victory, but his son will. Nebuchadnezzar II, one of the most famous kings in ancient history, inherits a newly independent Babylon and transforms it into something dazzling. But that's a story for another hour. For now, Babylon sits in an unfamiliar position, not defiant under siege, not humbled in chains, but victorious. Its temples ring with song. Its scribes record omens that, for once, speak of promise rather than doom. The river glows gold under the setting sun, and the old walls are rebuilt taller than before. One peculiar ritual emerges during this time, the humbling of the king ceremony, performed during the New Year festival. The high priest slaps the king, hard, and forces him to confess his unworthiness. If the king sheds a tear, the gods are pleased. If not, it's considered a bad sign. Modern scholars still debate whether this was more about divine favor or just a rare sanctioned opportunity for temple staff to get even. Either way, Babylon is back. And this time, it has plans. Victory, for Babylon, is a rare luxury. And under Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar II, that luxury becomes spectacle. The city transforms, not merely into a functioning capital or a pious seat of the gods, but into something bold, theatrical, and almost unbelievable. By the 6th century BCE, Babylon is the undisputed jewel of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar II wastes no time. His reign, spanning more than 4 decades, ushers in a new Babylonian empire and a golden age of art, architecture, and very public royal confidence. He's not just content to rebuild, he aims to outdo the gods in real estate. The streets of Babylon stretch wide and symmetrical, lined with massive, neatly patterned bricks. Palaces rise with ornamental facades. Canal systems are extended, rerouted, and flanked by embankments. The city's layout becomes a kind of divine geometry, every wall, gate, and corridor designed to reflect cosmic order. It's urban planning as theology. Most astonishing of all, perhaps, is the Ishtar Gate. Built from deep blue glazed bricks that shimmer in the Mesopotamian sun, it towers over the processional way, the grand avenue leading into the city. Across its surface, rows of sacred animals march in orderly formation. Lions for Ishtar, dragons for Marduk, bulls for Adad. The gate itself is not merely an entrance, it's a statement. This is not a city, it says, this is Babylon. The processional way is lined with ceremonial bricks inscribed with Nebuchadnezzar's proclamations. Thousands of them. The effect is both dazzling and exhausting. Historians still argue whether visitors were meant to read them all or just absorb their weight by osmosis. And then there are the temples. Chief among them, the Greater Sagala, Marduk's sanctuary, and the adjacent Etemenanki, the ziggurats some believe inspired the biblical Tower of Babel. 7 levels of brick and bitumen rise into the sky, possibly up to 300 feet high, though scholars debate the actual height. Some say it was massive, others suggest the grandeur has been inflated over time by both Babylonian scribes and later tourists with vivid imaginations. Still, the ziggurat is real enough. Pilgrims, priests, and royal officials climb its winding staircase to leave offerings at the top. The view would have been extraordinary, the Euphrates winding its lazy silver path, the green fields stretching beyond the walls, the glint of sun on palace domes. For those moments at the summit, Babylon must have looked eternal. Nebuchadnezzar is not all monuments and pageantry, though. He's a conqueror as well. His campaigns stretch far west, pushing into Syria and Palestine. Most famously, he captures Jerusalem, twice. The second time, in 587 BCE, he sacks the city and drags thousands of its inhabitants into exile. Among them are scribes, priests, and prophets who will preserve Babylon's name, though not in flattering terms, in biblical texts for centuries to come. Back in Babylon, the exiles become part of a broader cultural mosaic. The city under Nebuchadnezzar is teeming with diversity. Akkadians, Chaldeans, Arameans, Phoenicians, Elamites, and more, all crammed into its neighborhoods, temples, and markets. Languages overlap, as do clothing styles, cooking traditions, and rituals. One tablet from this period lists over 40 types of bread available at a single temple kitchen, proof that even divinity demands variety. Commerce flourishes. Grain ships line the Euphrates docks. Scribes tally quantities of dates, onions, and barley. Contracts are carved into clay with a confidence bordering on smugness. One preserved tablet records a trade deal that includes not only a detailed clause about delivery times, but a passive-aggressive note from the buyer, "Let the seller not delay again as last time." Even bureaucracy has its petty moments. And yet, behind the grandeur, there is restlessness. Babylon's wealth and ritual life are staggering, but the social fabric hums with tension. The city's elite, priests, nobles, royal administrators, control the flow of goods, favor, and divine interpretation. Meanwhile, laborious, farmers, and the increasingly diverse lower classes live in crowded quarters, their lives shaped by taxes, omens, and harvests. To distract from this, the festivals become more elaborate. The New Year's celebration, known as Akitu, lasts 11 days and involves processions, plays, sacrificial feasts, and cosmic reenactments. Marduk is symbolically imprisoned, battles chaos, dies, and returns, an ancient theological rollercoaster. The king participates directly, reenacting divine submission and renewal. It's religious spectacle on an imperial scale, part liturgy, part crowd control. Curiously, there's growing mention of wandering gods in texts from this era, statues that are moved from city to city during times of crisis or celebration. Whether these gods actually wanted to be relocated is unclear, but their movements are recorded with great seriousness. One letter to the king complains about the inappropriate transportation of a goddess's image, claiming she was not pleased to travel by barge. Historians aren't sure whether this reflects priestly indignation or literal divine temper tantrums. Still, Babylon glows at night with firelight and song. Inside the palace, Nebuchadnezzar oversees his court, issues decrees, and dreams in stone. He commissions inscriptions boasting of his accomplishments, many of which begin with variations on, "I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, who was not lazy." A solid start for any resume. He rules for over 40 years. When he dies, he leaves behind a city more resplendent than it has ever been. But also, perhaps, too reliant on its own myth. His successors will struggle to maintain what he built, not because they lack bricks or ambition, but because the sheer weight of Babylon's glory has begun to press down on itself. The ziggurat still rises. The Ishtar gate still gleams. But the shadows lengthen. A wind kicks up along the processional way, and in the flicker of a torch, a lion painted in glazed bricks seems to blink. For now, Babylon basks in its prime. The river murmurs. The stars shimmer. Somewhere, a priest marks down another omen, trying to decode the future from the quiet language of the sky. The river murmurs still, but something has shifted. Babylon, brilliant and broad, begins to carry a hint of uncertainty in the spaces between its bricks. It's the mid-6th century BCE, and while the city's streets still sparkle after rain, its future glistens a little less clearly. And somewhere in this hazy period of late Golden Age grandeur and early unease, a legend takes root, one so lush, so persistent, that it survives centuries of conquest and contradiction. The Hanging Gardens. A wonder of the ancient world, or perhaps a wonder of ancient marketing. These gardens, said to have towered above Babylon in cascading terraces, blooming with exotic flowers, cooling mists, and shadowy walkways, have enchanted imaginations for millennia. Greek writers describe them in lavish detail, crediting Nebuchadnezzar to himself with their creation. Supposedly, he built them to soothe his queen, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. A romantic gesture, if slightly over-engineered. But there's a problem. Babylonian records, obsessively thorough as they are, make no mention of the gardens. No royal inscriptions. No temple receipts. Not even a smug clay tablet saying, "I built the largest plant shelf in Mesopotamia." Historians still argue whether the gardens were a real place within Babylon, a poetic exaggeration of rooftop planters, or, most controversially, located somewhere else entirely. Some scholars now believe the Hanging Gardens may have been in Nineveh, built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. That theory, fueled by newly interpreted texts and archaeological hints, has ruffled more than a few academic feathers. If true, it would mean the greatest monument mistakenly credited to Babylon was actually built by one of its worst enemies. Ouch! But even if the gardens never existed in Babylon proper, the myth endured for a reason. Babylonian engineering was absolutely capable of such a marvel. The city already boasted advanced irrigation systems, including massive canals, aqueducts, and water lifting devices. One curious invention, the Archimedean screw, may have had earlier, cruder ancestors here, used to lift water from the river to higher terraces. and the Babylonians loved their plants. Texts from temple gardens list herbs, vines, and fruit trees maintained with almost obsessive care. Date palms, pomegranates, melons, leeks, garlic, all of it grown not just for food, but for medicine and ritual. Some gods required specific blossoms as offerings. Others had allergies, apparently. One preserved scroll details how to ritually cleanse a tree suspected of harboring evil spirits. It involves water, chanting, and politely asking the spirit to relocate. The appeal of the hanging gardens, real or not, lies in this blend of utility and wonder. Imagine it, a tiered tower rising beside the Euphrates, heavy with jasmine, fig, and palm, each level dripping with green. Shaded pools reflect the light. Fragrant vines curl around carved columns. Somewhere, a harpist plays a song only the plants seem to understand. It's paradise in stone and water. Whether fact or fiction, the idea of the gardens becomes inseparable from Babylon's identity. Travelers from afar, Greek mercenaries, Phoenician traders, wandering mystics, carry tales of a city where nature itself has been tamed and elevated. Babylon, in their stories, is not just a place of power and law, but of enchantment. Meanwhile, outside the legends, the real city hums along. The late Neo-Babylonian period remains vibrant, if slightly uneasy. The empire grows top-heavy, and court politics thicken like syrup. Nebuchadnezzar's immediate successors lack his commanding presence. His son, Amel-Marduk, rules only a few years before being overthrown, supposedly for being too lenient. Then comes a string of brief reigns, ambitious generals, and royal intrigue. Babylon, as always, doesn't fall. It just rearranges. One of the more fascinating figures of this twilight period is Nabonidus, a king whose interests lean more toward theology and archaeology than empire management. He spends years away from the city, obsessively restoring ancient temples in the Arabian desert and promoting the moon god Sin over the mighty Marduk, a controversial choice that does not sit well with Babylon's priests. While Nabonidus is off dusting ruins and making new friends among distant tribes, power in Babylon shifts into the hands of his son, Belshazzar, a name that will echo down corridors of history, though mostly for what happens next. One curious tablet from Nabonidus's time records a festival that was cancelled due to royal absence and public confusion. The phrase suggests a city unsure of who's in charge, a dangerous condition for a capital built on divine favor and celestial precision. Still, the streets are swept. The markets bustle. The ziggurat casts its long shadow over rooftops as always. From a distance, Babylon still gleams. But its center is less stable than it seems. The priests murmur. The omens are cloudy. And in the minds of those with long memories, the ghosts of Assyria's collapse begin to twitch. And yet, in the mythic garden, whether it bloomed in Babylon or just in Babylonian hearts, the water still trickles down polished stone. Vines tremble gently in the breeze. A queen walks among the shade trees, her sandals leaving damp prints on the tiles. Real or not, the image remains. Babylon has wrapped itself in myth, and the world believes. It is a city not just of bricks, but of symbols. And symbols, for better or worse, are hard to kill. The city's pulse quickens, though not from vitality but from an approaching storm. Babylon's golden age edges toward dusk as a new, foreign presence looms on the horizon. The Persians, under a cunning leader named Cyrus the Great, are on the rise. The Medes have already weakened Babylon's hold on the region, and Cyrus, blending military skill with political savvy, sets his sights on the jewel of Mesopotamia. Babylon, once a mighty conqueror of empires, now faces the reality of being conquered. Yet, unlike many ancient sieges that ended in ruins and mass slaughter, the fall of Babylon to Cyrus in 539 BCE is remarkably peaceful. Ancient sources describe how the city gates were opened without battle, with priests and citizens welcoming the Persian king as a liberator. One story even credits Cyrus with diverting the Euphrates River to allow his troops to enter the city through the riverbed, an engineering feat that feels equal parts brilliant and theatrical. This moment marks a profound shift. Babylon, which had been a capital of empires, now becomes a key city within the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cyrus, showing remarkable respect for local customs and religions, declares himself a servant of Marduk and promises to restore temples and worship. This policy of tolerance, practical and shrewd, help stabilize his rule and win over Babylonian elites. Inside the city, life continues much as before, but with subtle changes. Persian administrators arrive, new languages mingle in the markets, and imperial decrees are issued in multiple scripts, Babylonian cuneiform alongside Old Persian. The ziggurat still rises, the Ishtar gate still gleams, but the world around Babylon has grown larger and more complex. One fascinating artifact from this period is a clay cylinder known as the Cyrus cylinder. Often called the first human rights charter, it records Cyrus's policies on religious freedom and repatriation of displaced peoples, including Jews exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. Whether it was truly the world's first declaration of rights or a savvy piece of royal propaganda remains debated by historians. Either way, its discovery in the 19th century reignited interest in Babylon's final imperial chapter. As the Persian kings rule from afar, Babylon becomes a provincial capital, important but no longer sovereign. Its temples remain centers of worship, and its priests maintain their influential role, but political power shifts toward the Persian court in Pasargadae and later Persepolis. Meanwhile, Babylon's legendary grandeur slowly dims. Earthquakes and neglect begin to take their toll on the city's magnificent structures. The grand canals silt up, the walls crumble, and the once bustling streets grow quieter. Travelers from the Hellenistic world will later describe Babylon as a shadow of its former self. Despite this, the city holds onto its mystical reputation. Greek historians like Herodotus and later Alexander the Great himself are fascinated by Babylon. Alexander even plans to make it his empire's capital, commissioning repairs and expansions. His sudden death there in 323 BCE, however, leaves Babylon's future uncertain. By the time the Parthians and later the Sasanians take control, Babylon's political importance has largely vanished. Yet the city continues to be inhabited, its ruins serving as a somber reminder of past glories. Archaeologists today unearth cuneiform tablets, palace foundations, and remnants of its great walls, piecing together the story of a city that shaped human civilization's earliest chapters. The decline raises many questions. Historians still argue about the precise causes, whether economic shifts, environmental changes, or political upheaval were most decisive. What is clear is that Babylon's end was gradual, a fading of light rather than a sudden blackout. But Babylon's story did not vanish entirely. Its myths and symbols seeped into religions, literature, and art across the centuries. The biblical Tower of Babel, the Hanging Gardens, Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue made of metals. All these tales echo Babylon's enduring imprint on the world's imagination. As the sun sets on ancient Babylon, the city remains, in memory and myth, a testament to human ambition, creativity, and the relentless passage of time. Time moves forward, but Babylon's shadow stretches far and wide. As the Persian Empire gives way to the conquests of Alexander the Great, Babylon becomes a stage where ancient tradition meets new ambition. Alexander arrives in 331 BCE, a young king with eyes on the world, and Babylon greets him with the hope that its ancient glory might be rekindled under his rule. Alexander's plans for the city are grand. He envisions Babylon as the capital of his vast empire, a bridge between east and west. He orders repairs to its great walls and canals, commissions new palaces, and spends time studying Babylonian astronomy and religion. The city's priests and scholars offer their knowledge, recognizing a ruler who respects their gods. But fate has other designs. Alexander dies suddenly in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32, leaving his empire in chaos. His death in the city casts a long shadow, both historical and legendary. Some ancient sources suggest he was poisoned. Others claim illness. Whatever the truth, his passing marks the beginning of Babylon's slow decline. After Alexander, Babylon becomes a contested prize among his generals, the Diadochi, but none manage to restore the city's former majesty. Instead, power gradually shifts eastward towards Seleucia on the Tigris and later Ctesiphon, leaving Babylon to fade into a quieter provincial town. Even so, the city remains a center of learning and culture. Its astronomers, building on earlier Babylonian traditions, chart the stars and develop mathematical models that will influence later civilizations. Babylonian astrology, with its detailed horoscopes and omens, spreads throughout the Hellenistic world, blending with Greek ideas and eventually influencing Roman and medieval European thought. Meanwhile, Babylon's physical condition continues to deteriorate. The Euphrates shifts course, flooding some areas and leaving others parched. Without proper maintenance, canals silt up, agriculture suffers, and the population shrinks. The Grand Ishtar Gate, once blazing blue under the sun, loses its luster, bricks crumble, and vines creep over ancient walls. The city's decline invites a kind of archaeological nostalgia even in antiquity. Strabo, a Greek geographer writing centuries later, describes Babylon as mostly ruins surrounded by marshes, yet still impressive in scale. He recounts stories of vast walls and towers that once enclosed the city like a living fortress. Interestingly, some later texts claim Babylon never truly fell, that its temples were never abandoned, and its priests continued rituals in secret for centuries. While romantic, these claims are debated by scholars. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a city that slowly transformed, its importance fading but its spirit lingering. As centuries pass, the region around Babylon becomes a crossroads of empires. Parthians, Sasanians, and eventually Arabs bring new cultures, religions, and languages. Yet, the ancient city itself becomes more of a ghostly memory, its bricks and stories scattered by time and conquest. Modern archaeology, beginning in the 19th century, breathes new life into Babylon's story. Excavations uncover the Ishtar Gate's stunning glazed bricks, vast palatial complexes, and thousands of cuneiform tablets that reveal the city's administrative, religious, and daily life. These discoveries remind the world of a city that was once the beating heart of civilization. Babylon, for all its rise and fall, remains a powerful symbol, a place where human dreams of power, divinity, and beauty played out on an epic scale. Its legacy is woven into the fabric of history, inspiring stories, myths, and even the modern imagination. Though Babylon's grand days of empire are long behind it, its influence continues to ripple through history and culture in unexpected ways. The city's legacy survives not only in the fragments of brick and clay left buried beneath centuries of desert sand, but also in stories, symbols, and ideas that traverse time and geography. One such legacy is the biblical narrative of Babylon, an enduring and complex image that has fascinated scholars, theologians, and storytellers for millennia. Babylon appears in the Bible as a symbol of both human pride and divine judgment. It is the site of the infamous Tower of Babel, where humanity's attempt to reach the heavens results in the confusion of languages and scattering of peoples. It is also the oppressor in the Book of Daniel, the land of exile for the Israelites, and later a symbol of decadence and moral decay in the Book of Revelation. This biblical Babylon, however, is as much myth as history, a poetic lens reflecting the fears and hopes of ancient peoples grappling with empire, exile, and identity. Historians still argue about how much these biblical portrayals correspond to the real city, and how much they were shaped by political and religious agendas. Beyond scripture, Babylon's architectural and artistic motifs have left a lasting imprint. The distinctive glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate, with their vibrant blues and golden lions, inspired countless artistic revivals. In the 19th and 20th centuries, these motifs found their way into neoclassical architecture, theatre sets, and even pop culture references, reminding us how a city can live on visually long after its physical decline. Babylon's influence extends into language and metaphor as well. The term Babylon has been adopted in various cultures as shorthand for complexity, confusion, or even oppressive power structures. Reggae music, for example, uses Babylon to signify corrupt authority, a linguistic echo that travels from ancient Mesopotamia to modern political struggles. Interestingly, the scientific advances associated with Babylon continue to draw admiration. Babylonian astronomy and mathematics, particularly their sexagesimal, base 60 system, laid foundations for how humans measure time and angles today. Our 60-second minutes and 360-degree circles owe a debt to Babylonian scribes who, thousands of years ago, gazed at the night sky and sought order in the stars. Archaeologists and historians have pieced together much of Babylon's story from clay tablets, yet mysteries remain. For example, the exact layout and scale of some structures, including the legendary Hanging Gardens, continue to fuel debate. Was it a literal garden suspended in the air or a poetic metaphor for royal power and fertility? Were the gardens located in Babylon or elsewhere? These unanswered questions invite ongoing exploration and remind us that history is often an incomplete puzzle, shaped as much by interpretation as by evidence. Babylon, in this sense, remains alive, a city not just of the past, but of ever-evolving stories. The city's physical ruins, now situated in modern-day Iraq, face challenges of preservation amidst political turmoil and environmental pressures. Efforts by international organizations and local communities strive to protect what remains of Babylon's heritage. The hope is that future generations will continue to uncover and appreciate the layers of history buried beneath its sands. In many ways, Babylon's story is a meditation on the passage of time, the rise and fall of civilizations, the transformation of meaning, and the human desire to connect with something larger than ourselves. Through bricks and myths, science and scripture, the city endures, a silent witness to the endless dance between power and fragility. Babylon's legacy also weaves deeply into the realm of religion and spirituality, shaping beliefs far beyond its ancient walls. The city was once the epicenter of Mesopotamian religion, a complex tapestry of gods, rituals, and myths that profoundly influenced later traditions. Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, rose from a local god to a supreme figure in the Mesopotamian pantheon. His story, from humble beginnings to king of gods, reflects the city's own ascent from a modest settlement to imperial powerhouse. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes Marduk's triumph over the chaotic sea monster Tiamat, symbolizing the establishment of order over chaos, a theme echoed in many religious narratives worldwide. This mythological framework provided a worldview where kings ruled as earthly representatives of divine order. The Babylonian king was seen not merely as a political figure but as a religious intermediary, tasked with maintaining harmony between gods and humans. The city's temples, ziggurats, and festivals were vital centers of this sacred order. Babylonian religious practices were elaborate and meticulous. Priests interpreted omens in animal livers, read the movements of stars, and performed rituals to ward off evil. One particularly quirky tradition involved the use of crocodile dung as sunscreen, a practice that might raise eyebrows today but shows the practical knowledge intertwined with their spiritual life. Babylon's religious influence stretched far and wide. The city's astrology, deeply intertwined with its theology, traveled across empires, eventually influencing Hellenistic and later Islamic astronomical thought. This blending of science and spirituality is one of Babylon's most remarkable legacies. However, Babylonian religion was not without controversy. Historians still debate the extent to which its theology shaped or conflicted with emerging monotheistic religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Some scholars argue that Babylonian myths and rituals provided a cultural backdrop against which these religions defined themselves, borrowing and adapting themes to new theological ends. The city's destruction and conquest brought shifts in religious focus as well. Persian rulers promoted the worship of Ahura Mazda and Zoroastrianism, while later Hellenistic rulers introduced Greek gods. Yet Babylon's spiritual aura persisted, its deities and stories echoing through these cultural transformations. In the modern world, Babylon's religious legacy continues to fascinate. From scholars interpreting ancient tablets to artists reimagining mythic tales, the city remains a symbol of humanity's quest to understand the cosmos and its place within it. Babylon, once a city of many gods and mysteries, reminds us how faith and knowledge often walk hand in hand, shaping civilizations and cultures for millennia. The legacy of Babylon also extends into the world of law and governance, showcasing an early example of human attempts to codify justice and social order. Long before modern legal systems emerged, Babylonian rulers sought to create frameworks that balanced authority with fairness, though, by ancient standards, fairness often had a firm eye on hierarchy and social status. Perhaps the most famous artifact of Babylonian law is the Code of Hammurabi. Carved into a tall basalt stele, this code laid out nearly 300 laws covering everything from trade and marriage to theft and bodily injury. It famously proclaimed the principle of an eye for an eye, though in practice, punishments varied depending on one's social class. A crime against a nobleman was often punished more severely than the same crime against a commoner or slave. The code reveals a society deeply concerned with order and responsibility. Property rights, business transactions, family relations, and even the duties of builders were meticulously regulated. Builders, for example, could be held accountable if a poorly constructed house collapsed and caused death, a surprisingly early form of liability law. Interestingly, the stele itself was intended not only as a legal reference but as a symbol of divine authority. Hammurabi claimed the laws were given to him by the god Shamash, the god of justice. This intertwining of law and religion helped legitimize the king's rule and encouraged obedience among the people. The legacy of Babylonian law extends beyond its time. The code influenced later legal systems in the ancient Near East and even inspired aspects of Roman law, which would become a foundation for much of Western legal tradition. Historians still debate to what extent the Code of Hammurabi was applied in everyday life versus serving as an idealized guide, but its influence is undeniable. Babylon's approach to governance also included bureaucratic innovations. The city's administrators used cuneiform tablets to record transactions, tax collections, and legal proceedings, a form of early record-keeping that allowed for more complex state management. This bureaucracy helped sustain Babylon's empire and influenced administrative practices in later civilizations. Beyond the Stelae and tablets, Babylon's legal culture was reflected in its courts and judges, who interpreted laws in local disputes. These courts could be surprisingly pragmatic, often mediating rather than punishing, and demonstrating a flexible approach to justice. Even the quirky details reflect the city's character. One legal text details how to handle a case of a wife stealing jewelry, prescribing restitution rather than harsh punishment. Another discusses compensation for damages caused by domestic animals, showing a surprisingly nuanced understanding of responsibility. Through its laws, Babylon reveals itself as a society striving for order amid complexity, a place where justice was both a divine mandate and a practical necessity. Its legal heritage offers a window into the challenges of governance in an ancient world, and reminds us how the quest for fairness and stability is a timeless human endeavor. As centuries pass, Babylon's physical grandeur fades, yet its symbolic power refuses to dim. The city's massive walls and temples gradually fall into ruin, reclaimed by desert sands and forgotten by the world. Yet, in the whispers of history, Babylon remains a beacon of civilization's rise and fall, a lesson etched in mud bricks and myths. In the early Islamic period, Babylon's ruins were known as Babil, a name that carries through to the present. Local populations lived near or among the remnants, recycling stones for new buildings and telling tales of the once great city. The ancient site became more legend than metropolis, a place of fascination and mystery. European explorers and archaeologists arrived in the 19th century, eager to uncover Babylon's secrets. Robert Coldway's excavations revealed astonishing structures: the Ishtar Gate, the Processional Way, and the foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's palaces. His painstaking work brought Babylon back from obscurity, rekindling global interest. Yet this rediscovery came with challenges. Political instability, war, and environmental threats endangered the ruins. Modern efforts to preserve Babylon balance archaeological respect with tourism, development, and local needs, an ongoing debate about how best to honor and protect this cultural treasure. One intriguing modern chapter is the attempt by Saddam Hussein in the late 20th century to restore Babylon as a symbol of Iraqi national pride. Grand reconstruction projects, including a controversial replica of the Ishtar Gate, aimed to link the present to the ancient past. Critics saw these moves as politicizing history, while supporters argued for reclaiming heritage. Babylon today sits as both an archaeological site and a symbol. It draws visitors curious about human history's depths and scholars devoted to untangling its many mysteries. The site's preservation faces challenges from natural erosion, looting, and conflict, reminding us that history's treasures require vigilance to survive. Meanwhile, Babylon's story permeates popular culture, inspiring films, novels, and music. The city embodies themes of ambition, hubris, divine favor, and downfall. Whether in literature or in metaphorical use, Babylon remains a shorthand for complexity and wonder. Historians still debate many aspects of Babylon's life and legacy. What exactly did the Hanging Gardens look like, and were they even in Babylon? How much power did Babylon's kings truly wield at their empire's height? What was daily life really like beyond the grand palaces and temples? These questions keep Babylon alive, not just as a relic but as a living conversation between past and present. The city's echoes remind humanity that empires rise and fall, but stories endure. Babylon's ruins lie quiet beneath the sun, yet they speak loudly across time, a testament to human creativity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of meaning. As the centuries unfold, Babylon's legacy weaves through layers of time like a river carving its course, sometimes flowing strong, sometimes hidden beneath sands, but never entirely lost. The city, once the beating heart of Mesopotamia, transforms into a symbol that transcends geography and epoch, embodying the grandeur and fragility of human civilization. By the late medieval period, Babylon had largely vanished from maps, its ruins swallowed by the desert and the shifting course of the Euphrates. Yet stories of its magnificence persisted in manuscripts, travelers' tales, and oral traditions. To many, Babylon became a metaphor, an emblem of lofty human ambition, tangled confusion, and the divine consequences of pride. The modern era brought new light and interest to Babylon. Early archaeologists uncovered the remnants of its colossal walls, the famed Ishtar Gate with its vivid blue tiles, and countless clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script. The city's ancient voice revived after millennia of silence. These discoveries reshaped how the world understood Mesopotamia's role as the cradle of civilization. Today, Babylon stands at a crossroads, caught between its ancient past and the realities of a modern world. Preservation efforts aim to protect its fragile ruins, but political instability and environmental challenges complicate these endeavors. Despite this, the city continues to inspire archaeologists, historians, artists, and dreamers alike. Its stories continue to resonate, reminding humanity that empires are built not just from bricks and mortar but from ideas, beliefs, and the human spirit. The Hanging Gardens, whether fact or legend, speak to the desire to create beauty in a harsh world. Nebuchadnezzar's grand building projects reveal the ambition to leave a lasting mark. The laws inscribed on stone show early attempts to balance order and justice. Historians still debate Babylon's mysteries, the exact nature of its political power, the reality behind its most famous legends, and the interplay between myth and history. These uncertainties make Babylon all the more fascinating, a puzzle inviting continual discovery. In the end, Babylon's true legacy is not just in what remains but in what it represents. The story of human civilization's beginnings, its capacity for awe-inspiring achievement, and the humbling truth of impermanence. As the sun sets on this ancient city, its silent stones whisper a timeless message about ambition, creativity, and the passage of time. May this journey through Babylon's history lull the mind into peaceful rest, carrying the listener gently into dreams of ancient wonders and whispered tales. Now, as the echoes of Babylon's story fade softly into the quiet night, the mind can relax, sinking deeper into a calm, gentle stillness. Imagine the city's towering walls melting away into the horizon, the bustling streets giving way to soft whispers of wind through ancient ruins. The heat of Mesopotamian days cools to a soothing twilight, where time slows and history becomes a distant, comforting melody. There is no hurry here, only the slow passage of shadows and the steady rhythm of breath. Babylon's mighty kings and gods, its scholars and builders, all drift quietly into memory. Their stories, like a soft lullaby, invite rest and reflection, reminding us of the cycles of rise and fall, the fleeting nature of power, and the enduring beauty of human dreams. Let the senses soften, the smell of warm earth, the gentle rustle of palm leaves, the distant call of night creatures blending with the hush of a sleeping city. In this serene moment, the ancient world and the present intertwine, inviting peace to settle gently over the mind. As eyelids grow heavy, carry with you the wonder of Babylon, its mysteries, triumphs, and timeless whispers. Drift now, embraced by the calm, and let sleep take hold, cradled by the echoes of one of history's greatest cities. Sweet dreams.